morning and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this weekend edition on the 7th day of January 2023. Well, it's a beautiful day out here in Brisbane, remaining mostly sunny, around 28 degrees at this point in time. Well, ladies and gentlemen, once again, it's wonderful to have your company on this beautiful day in Brisbane. As I mentioned, well, we have a very small segment for you today, looking at our weekend edition. Well, right now, in Australia, there are some traditions which just keep getting better. Thousands of people are travelling to Canberra for the annual car festival. Here's the report.
I'm standing in front of one of 60 of the best Summer Nats cars this year. It's one of the 2,700 that have been registered this year, a record for the festival since it started in 1988. And one of those people is Carolyn Hayes. Carolyn, what can you tell us about the car behind us?
It's a 1975 model LH Tirana. I brought it in 2016, brought it home, and my husband and I pulled it apart and rebuilt it, top to bottom.
And what was that process like? I'm sure you kept working on it during the pandemic and you finally get to show it off.
Yeah, we spent many hours right through the COVID break in the shed building it, but also even in the last couple of years, it's just been non-stop to get it here this weekend. It doesn't matter how long ago you started, it always seems to be a rush at the end.
And what's the appeal of the Summer Nats Festival for you to come every year?
I think it's just a place where people, that do this for a hobby and for a living can just enjoy other people's work, their own work, and just show everybody what we've been doing and what we love.
And there will be plenty more cars like this to see roaming around the city until this Sunday.
And those magnificent machines, as they are known, yes, they don't build them like those anymore. And as she mentioned, that it is always a lot of effort, and no matter how ahead of time you begin, but there is always seems to be that rush in the final minute to get everything done. Well, wonderful, and hope the festival goes well. Congratulations to everyone. Well, Western Australia's flooding, what is it about? It means that it is one of the worst ones ever recorded.
Cut off by an ocean of water in the vast floodplains of the Fitzroy River.
No one knew where the water was going to get to. It just caught us by such surprise, and it fell that hard, that quick, that it rose just metres and metres overnight.
People from surrounding communities have sought refuge in Fitzroy Crossing, itself now an island.
Our main concern is around health conditions and being able to get our elderly relatives back to Levy or Broome.
It's the worst flooding the state has ever experienced.
We've not seen anything like this before, a 1 in 100 year flood event.
Volunteers are helping organise food supplies in Fitzroy Crossing. But there's frustration over the coordination and communication by emergency services.
We're dealing with people that can't make decisions. The community leaders like myself and others are trying to get answers and trying to understand so that we can convey that message back to our community. And all we get treated is like mushrooms.
They're just all over the place. There's nothing set up. There hasn't been anything set up.
We're surrounded by water. I'm not denying that.
Bad weather has hampered the arrival of Defence Force personnel. But with Broome Airport now back open, help is finally on the way.
With conditions expected to ease around the Kimberley in coming days, emergency service workers will be evacuating dozens of residents from Fitzroy Crossing and assessing the damage.
While record flooding in Fitzroy Crossing is slowly easing, downstream communities are still under threat.
I was told yesterday there were about 100 people in Nookamba, so to last night we would have moved the 23 people who were most vulnerable in the community.
Ex-tropical cyclone Ellie is expected to cross into the Northern Territory over the weekend. Hannah Barry, ABC News, Broome.
And we really play for everyone to make sure that everyone remains safe. And in those areas, the best thing to do is always listen to the warnings. And if you are asked to evacuate, please do so. And if the emergency workers are there, please do lend them a hand, at least cooperate with them, if try not to hinder the efforts of those emergency workers. Well, right now, a Paralympian was refused a Uber ride because he had a guide dog with him.
So I was with my guide dog Guthrie, and we were doing what a lot of people do. Summertime, we were heading to the aquatic centre for a swim. So we ordered an Uber, and there's always a process with that, and waited for the Uber. The Uber driver eventually arrived, and he refused to take us. And he was quite adamant that Guthrie, my guide dog, and I couldn't get in the car, that I'd ordered the wrong sort of Uber car, and that he wouldn't take us. And his doors were locked. I tried to reason with him and explain, look, Guthrie's a guide dog. I have low vision. It's a legal requirement that you take Guthrie and I. He's good. He just sits on my feet in the front seat of the car. I've never had this issue before. And he refused and drove off. And I guess to give you some context, that leaves you feeling quite defeated, and it's very offensive and quite stressful. But thankfully, I was there stranded on a busy road, so I had to order another Uber, and one eventually showed up. And funny enough, he said, "Oh no, I don't take dogs." And I said, "Oh look, it's a guide dog." And he said, "Oh, that's fine, okay." And off we went. But it was very unfortunate. It's frustrating, and we are just trying to, do what everyone else is doing in the community and be able to access products and services like this. So it was very unfortunate that this happened, and I think it's really important that we continually raise awareness that these things are happening in our community, and we need to constantly be educating people, and in my situation, about the use of guide dogs.
Yeah, it is a very disappointing situation. Katie, there has been a push over recent years for services to be more accessible and more inclusive. Is this an experience that you have had before?
Not with my guide dog. I've had Guthrie now for 7 weeks, and I'm so grateful for the NDIS and the Australian public. You've made this possible for me, for someone who's losing my vision, and I also have hearing loss. I'm very grateful for this support, and the interaction I have with the community at large is fantastic. And people, more and more, thank for days like International Day of People with Disability, thanks to people like Graham Innes, the former Disability Commissioner, who explained the situation he had at Adelaide Airport last year, where he was separated from his guide dog. Thanks to people like Dylan Alcott, the Australian of the Year last year. The access is getting better. The understanding and the awareness has improved. But I think when you're in a situation like that, you're using a service such as Uber with all the resources and capabilities it has, and I do commend it's doing some wonderful work in educating its drivers. The requirements of drivers are that they are to accept people with guide dogs. There's been a lot of improvement, but I think that we need to constantly have these conversations, but it's not always easy. A lot of things that people take for granted, those people with disabilities, whether they're in chairs or with a guide dog or have mobility issues, every day we tend to encounter some various challenges.
And Katie, when this happened, I believe you contacted Uber. What was their response, and were you satisfied with it?
I contacted Uber via the Uber app. That was the first means, and I think we've all had the experiences where we're just talking to somebody we don't, it's by email communication. Eventually I got a reply, and I spoke to one of their community consultants yesterday, and she was lovely. And I said to her, look, this is just about raising awareness. I said, I have a foundation for children with disability, and we give out grants, and these kids are aged 7 to 17. My engagement with Uber is about the education that needs to be continually had, and ensuring that they're accountable and doing everything possible to ensure that everybody can access and use their service. So Uber have a requirement for drivers when they sign up that they understand the Disability Discrimination Act, that they understand the requirements to access passengers with guide dogs, and I'm sure other passengers that in chairs, etc. And they also advised me that drivers are effectively given 2 chances. So if this happens again, I understand that they perhaps terminate the contract with that driver. They also offered to compensate for the trip. But it's not really about that. But I appreciated their response, and I think, it's just really important that they continue to be accountable for that and to educate their drivers.
And again, there is an issue there and something that really needs to be addressed. I know there are many people who are frustrated with online apps and applications where you don't have provisions to supply. I mean, she could not, when ordering, if there was an area where she said, I have a dog or a guide dog, there are many times, there are many things like that which you just can't do. There is only limited options when you're ordering. Same goes for taxis. There are other taxi booking apps. And of course, the same with the food as well. Manilog, Uber Eats, and all the ones as well. There are limited things. And the frustrating part is they take your money up front. Your credit card gets charged first. Whether or not the service is delivered, then there are all sorts of problems on cancellations that your money will come back in 7 days. And so there is an area where a lot needs to be looked at. There has to be some regulation about those charges as well. Right now, let's move on to this beautiful news. Adelaide, is going to be host to a rare cost flower which is about to bloom.
People who are visiting the Adelaide Botanic Gardens over the weekend may get a little bit more than what they bargained for. This corpse flower behind me is set to bloom within the next 24 hours. Now, it might be nice on the eye, but it is a completely different story when it comes to the nose. The plant is native to the Indonesian island of Sumatra. It is endangered, mainly due to deforestation, which is why it can be found across botanic gardens right across the world. It is rare for these plants to flower. It takes 10 years for it to first flower. When it flowers, it absolutely stinks. It's likened to rotting flesh, dead rats or off cheese. The flowering only lasts for 48 hours. It is its most mephitic within the first 24 hours. Probably not one to buy for your partner this Valentine's Day.
Not the one to give to your partner on the Valentine's Day. And of course, right now, it is just wonderful to see that happening. Well, talking about some rare species, what about, Victoria's Ottaway Ranges are home to some of the very, very exotic plants.
This was a completely bare block, not a thing on it. 40 years later, we've got almost 100% what you'd call forest and woodland cover. Name's Alistair Watt, and we live here at Lavers Hill, southwest Victoria. Very proud to say I'm a member of the International Dendrology Society, and that is for people who grow trees. And this is where I think is really cool. There was an article published on the most exclusive societies in the world that you can't join. Well, our society was on that list. You can only be in it if you're invited to join. I make furniture for a living, and one of the timbers I work for was Yuan Pine. I actually opted to stop using it. It shouldn't be getting used for what I was doing. Yuan Pine is a very beautiful wood, and it's very slow growing. It only grows along riverbanks in very wet places in Tasmania, and it takes hundreds and hundreds of years to get a tree big enough to mill for timber. I tried to track some down here to grow. Eventually I found some. This little beauty could be growing for another 1,000 or 2,000 years. This is one of the first trees I planted here. This is a matter of great patience. Well, I got the Yuan Pine growing, and then I started tracking down other trees, and it became obvious that some of the trees I was interested in growing weren't being grown in Australia. So then became a new challenge how to find the way to go and get them from overseas to bring back for the garden. Plant hunting is the term they use, or plant exploration. What you do is you do all your research, preparation, write to lots of people over there, forestry departments, university is that, and then get over, go and track them down, we're bringing seeds mainly, and cuttings back to Australia. Probably I introduced something around 200, 250 new plant species to Australia and to some gardens overseas. So my favourite is a conifer called Dacrydium guilleminii. It's very rare. There you are, that's my real favourite. So this is probably about 15 years old, this particular little specimen. Only grows in one little spot in New Caledonia beside a river. Actually grows in the water of the river. But if you see it growing in the wild, it just looks so ancient. You just can imagine a dinosaur walking down to drink at the river and splatting his big foot on top of it, and there it goes, getting even more rarer. Some of the trees are planted will take hundreds of years. Well, I certainly won't be around for it. So this one here, just to put things in perspective, is about 20 years old. It's probably about 4 meters high. When they get big, think 80 meters. So when that's about, this is 2,500 years old, it could well be 80 meters high. If it ever is lost in the wild, there is some semblance of a stock left. Some of these trees are recorded as being here. Someone needs to get them for scientific work. Yeah, I mean, it's not a planned career path. It's just something that, you know, it keeps grabbing your attention. People say you're mad to start a garden like this, but then after 40 years you get used to doing it and living it. I don't know how people manage not to build a garden.
And what a wonderful work that's being done there, you know, looking at those amazing, beautiful plants from all around the world. There's not many people who would be doing things like that. Well, right now, our going out story for this weekend edition is world's population. Where are we headed? What are the numbers? He is our super mathematician.
It's a momentous time in the history of the world. The world's population just ticked over 8 billion. All right, that's not a precise number. We haven't counted everyone on Earth up, but it is the best estimate from the UN's global population predictions. It's hard to keep up, though, because the world's growing fast by about 200,000 people a day. Between the time I started this sentence and the time I'll finish it, the world will grow by about 20 people. Population growth won't go on forever. In fact, it's already slowing down.
This is a fundamental transformation of what a society looks like.
I want to find out what we might need to do to get ready for the future and how ready for that future we are.
A growing need for a healthcare system that can handle and respond to an aging population.
And the numbers now to 345 million people marching towards starvation.
We need to do much more, and I think we need to do it much faster.
As the world reaches 8 billion and counting. What's the most populous nation in the world? For decades, as long as we've had international records from the UN, the answer to that question has been China. But soon, China will no longer top the population list. It's about to be overtaken by India, one of the fastest growing countries in the world. And that is forecast to happen next year. Beyond bragging rights, that doesn't mean much changes immediately, but it's the first of many significant shifts in population on the horizon. But to understand the future, we have to start at the beginning. The Homo sapien population boom has happened remarkably fast. Through the ancient world, our best estimates are that the population grew very slowly, reaching maybe 230 million at the time of Cleopatra's death. We reached 500 million during the Renaissance, and there were 1 billion of us when Thomas Jefferson was US president. The 2 billion mark was reached just before the Great Depression, and things really sped up from there. Just 35 years later, there were 3 billion of us walking the earth, and since then, another billion were added every 10 to 15 years. And that gets us to today's 8 billion. But let's take a few steps back, because this point in time is where that population curve was steepest. The swinging 60s. In many countries, a time of economic prosperity. Our cities were on the move, growing fast as the world rapidly urbanised. This is when the world experienced its biggest baby boom in history. Globally, women were having, on average, 5 children each. Fertility rates, in other words, the number of children being born, are one of the biggest drivers of population growth. And 2.1 is the magic number. If fertility falls below that 2.1 level of births per woman, we expect the population to start falling. And that is where we're headed. In fact, in Europe, in North America, and Australia, New Zealand and parts of Asia, fertility rates are below that replacement rate already.
Sort of universal trend that we're seeing around the world is declining fertility rates.
Now we're approaching the end of what we call the demographic transition, where fertility is quite low, people are living long lives.
But while fertility rates are falling, the world is still growing. For now, where are we heading? From 8 billion today, the United Nations projects the global population will reach about 9.7 billion in 2050. But from there, things really slow down. Let's walk forward another 30 years, because the world's expected to reach about 10.4 billion in the 2080s. And that is about the peak. The UN thinks it'll stay around that number for a couple of decades, before then falling. That's one model. Another, produced by health research centre the IHME, suggests the world population might peak much sooner, in just 40 years.
Our model suggests that we expect fertility to continue to decline through the end of the century in many countries, and that's contributing to a larger and a faster global population decline than the United Nations.
Some countries are already shrinking. Many of those that are in the Balkans. There are conflicts too that can cause sudden temporary changes to populations, like in Ukraine, which is about 18% smaller than it was in 2021. Ukraine might rebound, but in the long run, it is a country that's likely to shrink, along with scores of other countries. All of these countries here are expected.
So there you are, ladies and gentlemen, 8 billion and counting. A wonderful report there, very comprehensive report as well. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have time for you in this weekend edition. And of course, we will be resuming all our programs on the regular time, probably from next week. We'll have our weekly real estate update, the Aapki Sehat, which is the doctor's program, and Migration Ka Safar, and the long overdue Music Junction. Yes, that is coming up your way very soon as well. This is all slowly getting back into the motion and getting the wheels rolling again for 2023. We're 7 days in already, and soon it will be Christmas, as they reckon. Well, enjoy the rest of your weekend, doing whatever you're going to do, and just enjoy the last few days of the holidays. But always safety first, remain safe. There'll be a lot of people heading back, and there will be frustration and all that. So please, please, please be considerate of others. Take your time if you're driving, and if you can afford it, just don't drive at all. Unless it's absolutely necessary and it's needed, try and avoid that. And if you can, and let's reduce the number of cars on the road. Well, right now it's time to say goodbye till Monday. We'll see you then.